Okay, so thoughts on the game so far. I'm going to start with a contrast. I don't want this to sound like negative, okay? And this isn't a negative thought on the game or anything like that. I'm going to start with a contrast only because I've talked about this with a couple of other people, and I feel like it's the easiest way to set up into my thoughts, okay? So, to lay, like, the groundwork, Hollow Knight obviously is a Metroidvania. There's nothing new there. My background, personally, with Metroidvanias is primarily Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night. The only other Metroidvania that I can recall playing to any other, like, significant extent is Axiom Verge. And Axiom Verge is, of course, I mean, it was the other, like, really big, massive, like, main Metroidvania next to Hollow Knight for a while, and it was supposed to be traditionally more inspired by Super Metroid, whereas this was more inspired by Symphony of the Night, or at least that's how it seemed from the outside looking in. Playing Hollow Knight so far, it seems akin to neither of them, right? Which is interesting, and in a very different way, right? I didn't expect it to be that much like that. Symphony of the Night is very much the kind of thing where you explore the castle, you get like a lot of different like upgrades, you find a lot of different like side stuff. It's not necessarily hard, but you like level up. Can be more difficult at the beginning of the game, you get very overpowered and it becomes like easier kind of thing. Super Metroid is significantly more focused on exploration. Combat's a part of it, and combat is even a part of like platforming and exploration and stuff like that, right? Hollow Knight is more, how do I put this? Hollow Knight is more focused on the world. Symphony of the Night is more focused on exploring Dracula's castle, and a lot of the world building comes second. Super Metroid is very focused on exploring the alien world, and world building comes second, right? There are other Metroid games that do a much better job at world building than Super Metroid. Hollow Knight is very much like you are exploring because you want to know more about the world. There's mysteries about the world. There's this kingdom that's been set up that died off, like that sort of thing. You want to explore more about it, right? I just got to this like far off Kingdom's Edge area, right? One of the reasons why I want to explore this is because it seems interesting. Why is it the edge of the kingdom? Why didn't people explore out here, right? If I go like a little bit farther, just to show you something that I saw recently, over here, right, there's this little area with a tent and people that are dead in the snowed out area. It kind of seems like an expeditionary force that was trying to explore more to expand out the kingdom to see what else might be out there, and they died doing that. Kind of like an Antarctic expedition, right? That indicates to me 5-head wine time. True. Get the fucking wine out, dog. I got black coffee. That's the best that I can offer. That focus on world building and exploration and kind of like a natural sort of, they're just it's like a dead world with things like spread around that indicate some sort of story, some sort of kingdoms or sort of whatever that existed here before. That's very akin to Dark Souls, right? Less akin to Elden Ring, more akin to Bloodborne, less akin to Sekiro, more very much akin to Dark Souls. And I think that's the main comparison to me that I want to start with before I just add on like a couple of other thoughts about the game. Dark Souls is a game that is very much, I don't remember if we talked about this, if you've played like Dark Souls 1 or anything like that especially, but Dark Souls is a game that's very much focused on, it's a dead world, there was a kingdom here that was established, it died off, you're here to fulfill some sort of prophecy, right? That's very akin to Hollow Knight. You're here, you don't necessarily know why. It seems like there's some sort of prophecy that you need to fulfill. At least I'm learning that now, is a little bit less clear before. There was a kingdom here that's dead. Everything that was like smarter essentially or more aware is pretty much dead except for a few NPCs. So all of the royals, for example, are husks of their former selves. And that aspect is very much akin to Dark Souls. These to me are like almost one-to-one. Another aspect of that is that it seems like most of the storytelling of the game, not that one, happens, for example, through like these sorts of things. So slow, fat, and easily vanquished, common threads in those who forget their calling and forsake their duties, right? You get like a little bit of information about the enemy and what it's supposed to be doing through descriptions or through item descriptions, I believe as well, right? A little bit relic from Hallowness Past. This item now holds a little value except for those who dedicated to the kingdom's history. A journal left behind by a long dead traveler. The words are written in a forgotten dialect and difficult to understand that tells you about the world. Official seal of the kingdom of Hallowness, symbolizing the authority of the kingdom's knights. That is very akin to Dark Souls. So essentially what it is, you've got a world that has a narrative or a story baked into it. It's hidden underneath. You have to discover it yourself, and you find out the narrative through that, okay? Very akin to Dark Souls. Um, then another thing, because it does seem like the game was kind of trying to angle towards Dark Souls in that way, you then get the combat. And the combat, again, is kind of similar-ish to Souls in like a general way that it's punishing, requires a lot of timing and positioning, and has like builds that's akin to Souls, right? It's not like one-to-one, but on a macro level, it's sort of similar in that way. Okay. That's kind of the end of that comparison with Dark Souls, right? The thoughts on those aspects of the game, because I only really bring out that comparison to show kind of what the establishment of the game is, right? And to me, it's easiest to compare it to Dark Souls just because it seems so akin. Dark Souls pulls from like a ton of other stuff, so it's kind of harder to just say Dark Souls is replicating this thing. You have to talk about all these different individual elements and mechanics and systems of Dark Souls to talk about what makes it. Hollow Knight, it feels like you can just use Dark Souls as a really big reference point to jump into what it feels like the game is trying to do. So from a storytelling and an exploration perspective, I feel like it does it incredibly well so far. I think that it is very fascinating to me that it feels like there's less. So far, it feels like there's less branching paths that you can only go through once you get like a new upgrade that is especially everywhere in Super Metroid. A little bit less pronounced in Symphony of the Night, but still very much there. But the game focuses on making it so that every single like bit of exploration tells you a bit more about the world. It sacrifices a little bit of that puzzle solving for world building, which I think is totally fine. It's very unique for a Metroidvania. This is the first like truly like story narrative based Metroidvania that I feel like I've played. The combat, because I was having a little bit of a debate about this with someone last night. The combat is good. I like the combat. It's a little bit simplistic to me. The combat, It is one of the most... It requires a lot of precision, right? It requires you to be fairly precise with attacking, fairly precise with platforming, fairly precise with positioning, fairly precise with timing, all of that sort of stuff. And it's a very like fast and fluid kind of system. You can turn back and forth really quick. You can like attack really quick. You can upgrade your attack. You get dashes. You get all these sorts of things that makes combat a lot easier. But all it really comes down to at the end of the day is jumping, moving around, dashing. I would kind of include dashing as like another form of moving around, and then attacking. And that pretty much, no matter how you build, you might get spells and stuff, or you do get spells and you might use spells more, right? You might build more for spells. That's kind of it. That's kind of all there is to the game. And that's cool, that's good. And I can compare it in my brain to another action platformer that I love, Castlevania Rondo of Blood. I feel like that's the hardest platformer game that I've played. That game is a little bit different in the sense that the platforming, the movement's a little bit more punishing. You move more slowly. The jumping is less exact, but you also take a fuck ton of damage when you get hit. It's very precise when you have to hit, like all of that sort of stuff. Hollow Knight feels like that, like a more simple action platformer game, but like with a few more things added on. So more more movement options, more like spells, like that sort of stuff, right? Granted, I don't even know if I'm halfway through the game yet. I've heard very like conflicting information on where I am through the game. So it might be that later on there's going to be a ton more shit, right? That's significantly more challenging. But as of right now, that kind of feels like it's the core, and then there's modifiers from there. That's not a bad thing, mind you. That's not a bad thing. A game having a simplistic core combat system can actually work incredibly well. A lot of, why can't I think of the name? Mascot fighters? No. What the fuck am I thinking of? Like Devil May Cry and stuff. I don't know why I can't think of like Bayonetta, like those styles of games. I don't know why I can't think of the... Whatever. Point being is just that in those games have very core or simple core combat systems that you can build upon. with a lot of different combos, a lot of different spells, a lot of different abilities and stuff. But at its core, it's still like very simplistic, as opposed to a Souls game where it's more like a very like wide breadth of possibilities of things that you can do with different builds and stuff. You can like pull from different parts to make different builds, but each and every single playthrough might be like fairly different. Yeah, so I would say that so far it's kind of like on the macro scheme, getting through Hollow Knight feels very fun because it's drawing me forward to find all these different things throughout the world and to find out more about the world, to be more ingratiated in it. It does a really good job at making me feel like I'm a part of the world, but navigating through it on a moment-to-moment basis, the platforming's fun, not quite as good as something like Celeste or as challenging as something like Celeste. It's just a random example. And then the combat's fun, but not nearly as depthy as something like Dark Souls. So it's sort of the thing where it's like a really deep world and then like a relatively simplistic way to navigate through the world. And I feel like there's like a little bit of like a mismatch between these two things so far, whereas like you get this really high investment from the world and a little bit less investment from the gameplay. Did you get more charm notches, or are you experimenting with charms? Admittedly, not as much. I fully admit that, and maybe I am like missing an okay bit about the game with that. I've pretty much been using these since the beginning. I've gotten an okay amount of charms, and I've been reading what they do. But I haven't really... Yeah, especially because, like, admittedly, I have an issue of not liking using spells in games where I can just hit instead. Usually, if I do spell type stuff, it's on like a second or whatever playthrough. From my understanding, this game kind of encourages you to use everything a little bit more, so I probably do need to experiment a little bit more. And maybe the game does feel a little bit more depthy with spells. To me, so far, with the spells that I have used, it feels just kind of like a modifier on top of stuff, but also it's kind of fun to brute force bosses low W. I agree. I fully agree. 1,000,000% agree. And that's also something that I really like, right? Is the fact that, like, for example, Mantis Lords, I beat before I got a single, like, needle upgrade, right? I beat them relatively quickly on, like, my third try. I don't know if that's very impressive. I had somebody in chat that was telling me that it took them, like, 50 tries or some shit like that. Cinema Mantis Lords, cool-ass boss fight. I also, I beat Lost Kin, and that was, like, another thing that was cool to just kind of, like, you know, figure out my, like, one, like, pattern that I was going to do throughout the boss and, like, beat it that way. Again, all relatively simplistic. It feels like with like a bit of a modifier, like I could have done more spells, I could have done more whatever, but I was just kind of like exemplifying that it's just kind of like one like straightforward way to approach the game. Still fun, but it's a lot more, I would use the term arcadey so far. Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. It just is what it is. Let me actually look over some of these more. Someone's we really need to give the lonely bear some companionship and protection. I mean, that sounds decent. Maybe I could use that instead of one of these. I feel like I've noticed that this doesn't actually do much. Like, maybe it does, and I just haven't, like, noticed it. Clap 10 out of 10 analysis. Thank you, thank you.